It is 2:15 and the orders of the day call us into our session. Just as a word of reminder, it's important for this part of the assembly in particular that voting members are to be in advance of the signs, and guests, if you can be to the rear, that would be wonderful. PMA Rick Miller, as a representative of the Committee on Registration and Attendance, would you please come forward and make your report?
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Committee on Registration and Attendance, the report shares lay voting members 332, deacons 8, pastors 129, total voting members 469, total eligible voting members 938, quorum at our assembly 469. Our Constitution requires that our assembly be comprised of no less than 60% lay members. There are 332 lay members present and voting. This represents 71% of the whole. We are in compliance with our Constitution. Thank you.
We have a properly constituted quorum for conducting the business of the assembly. We will now address the first two resolutions that are being presented by the Synod Council dealing with agenda and rules of procedure. The Bulletin of Reports is available for download online at www.nebraskasynod.org. We will not be reading the resolutions in their entirety, but the resolved portions will be shown on the screen so you will be aware of what is being voted on. As a resolution is presented, if you would like to address the resolution, please approach the microphones and bring your voting card. Green if you wish to speak in favor of the resolution, red if you wish to speak against it. I will be able to call on speakers on a rotating basis, pro and con. If you have a question about the resolution, please bring forward a white card. I call on Gwen Edwards, Nebraska Synod Secretary, to come forward to present the first Synod Council resolution.
Resolved that the proposed Synod Assembly agenda be adopted as the order of business for the 2023 Synod Assembly being held June 2 through 3, 2023.
It has been moved that the proposed agenda be adopted as the order of business for this assembly. It is a Synod Council resolution and therefore does not require a second. Is there any discussion? If there is no discussion, are you ready to vote? All those in favor, please raise your green voting card. Those opposed, please raise a red voting card. This resolution has passed. Secretary Edwards will present Synod Council Resolution number 2.
Resolved that the rules of procedure for this assembly be adopted.
It has been moved that the proposed rules of procedure for this assembly be adopted. Again, this is a Synod Council resolution and therefore does not require a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, please prepare to vote. All those in favor, please raise your green voting card. All those opposed, red voting cards. This resolution has passed. The next set of items are scheduled to be considered en bloc. This means we will take one vote to adopt all of them. Per our rules, 10 members of the assembly may request to have an item removed for separate consideration. Are there any such requests at this time? We have a white card. Microphone over here. Do we have numbers for the microphones, by the way? Is this 1 or 4? Doesn't matter. Microphone here to the left.
I'm
Name and congregation too, please, if you would.
Myron Meyer. I'm cleric at interim down at St. Paul's, Soap Creek, rural DeWitt. Can we break this apart so we can talk about the individual parts?
This is where, if you would like to move a resolution out of the en bloc, you can request to do so.
Yes, I'd like to do that with the salary grid.
Okay, which resolution would you like to move out? The number or the number?
I do not know the number.
In the book of resolutions, it should be, we have Synod Council, I believe this is Synod Council Resolution number 5, related to compensation guidelines for pastors and deacons.
That would be number 5 then. Thank you.
We have a request to move SC Resolution number 5 out of en bloc. That requires 10 members of the assembly. So are there 9 others who would like to move that out of en bloc? If so, please raise your green cards. We have 10. We have 10 persons who have requested to move that resolution out of en bloc, so that will be discussed on its own. The order is to then address remaining en bloc resolutions, so we will return to it. Are there any other resolutions the assembly would like to move out of en bloc?
Hi, Pastor Sarah Rook from Sheridan Lutheran Church in Lincoln. They are not on page 1011. Can you please show us where they actually are, the en bloc items?
I'm sorry, I had trouble hearing you there, Sarah. What were you asking?
I am not finding them on page 1011 of my bulletin of reports, the en bloc items.
Okay.
19 and 20, they're saying? Thank you.
Okay. Are there other resolutions the assembly would like to move out of en bloc? Seeing none, we will then go to a vote on the en bloc resolutions. Oh, my apologies. Gwen, go ahead. Would you like to present the en bloc items?
On behalf of the Synod Council, I move that the remaining en bloc items detailed on page 19 of the Bulletin of Reports be approved.
Because the motion comes from the Synod Council, no second is required, and pursuant to our assembly rules, we will go directly to a vote on the motion. All those in favor, please raise your green voting cards. And opposed, raise your red voting cards. The motion has passed. We will now move to discussion of resolution number 5, which has been moved out of en bloc. And I believe you are to read the resolved portions of that resolution.
Resolved that the 2024 compensation guidelines for pastors and deacons be approved.
Okay. Let's take just a minute and make sure we all get everybody on the right page to look at the document that we are referring to. Thank you. Beginning on page 70 in your bulletin of reports. So page 70 in your bulletin of reports, it reads 2024 Compensation Guidelines and Parsonage Guidelines for Ministers of Word and Sacrament and Word of Service, Nebraska Synod, ELCA. Again, that is page 70 in your bulletin of reports. And I am going to consult very quickly to see what our next steps are now that that's been moved out of en bloc, if we need to have a motion or discussion first. So give me a minute to talk. What's that? We are moving to discussion, correct? Okay. So we are going to move to discussion of this motion, and I'm going to call on Pastor Meyer, again, name and congregation, and then you have 2 minutes to address the motion, to address the resolution.
Pastor Meyer, cleric at St. Paul's, Soap Creek, rural DeWitt. We've talked about ideas. We're talking about clergy shortage. We're talking about a number of congregations that have openings for clergy. I think we're wringing our hands in some respects. But the one thing I've often thought is that we don't talk about salary. I have a question for those who are attending, because you guys are the ones who are most vested in the synod here. How many of you have encouraged your children to go into ministry? Raise your hand. Oh, sorry. How many of you have encouraged your children or grandchildren to go into ministry? Raise your hand. How many of you have a child or a grandchild that's in ministry? Okay. I don't know if this is indicative or not of what we need to be about. The one thing that I think of is that younger generations, it costs a lot more to get into seminary, college seminary, than when I went. When I was ordained 35 years ago, and when I was in seminary, it cost $1,200 for tuition. I remember my home pastor talking about it didn't cost anything. I think we need to be able to have a better salary grid for our pastors. I'm near retirement. It doesn't matter for me anymore. But for our new pastors, 30 seconds, okay, that we need to change this. And if congregations can't do it, we got to start merging or yoking up or partnering congregations so that we can have salaries that will attract pastors. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, are you ready to vote? Are you rising for discussion? Please come forward.
Pastor Ricardo from St. John, Kronborg, and Trinity in Polk. I appreciate, the reality is, everybody that I talk in my congregation, they're all honorable profession, going to be teachers, so it's a great service to the community, going to, so many honorable professions. But the borderline is, to be a pastor, even though I think, is a great for me, I'm very thankful, is not being attractive to a lot of people. It's not a profession, and should not be all about money. Of course, it's a call. But if there is not a finance incentive, and is hard, and it's not a desired profession. All my congregation, I try to encourage people to go to seminary and everything, and they would rather do anything else rather than be a pastor. So I just want to thank you all that you are serving, and of course, none of us is because of the money, but with the pastor shortage, and there's also the side that congregations is struggling to pay us, and I don't have the answer, but we need to make it more attractive for people to want to be pastors. And if we need extra financial incentive, so be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Is there any further discussion of the resolution? Okay. Let's go here and then to this mic over here next.
Marian Blair, pastor at First Lutheran Church in Omaha. I just have a question, and this is probably due to ignorance because I'm not sure, but is there funding through the Synod or through church-wide to help congregations to pay for their clergy?
I don't know that we can really answer that question from this part of the conversation here. None that I'm aware of. I think it'd be in the interest of the Synod to do so if there was, but I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to discuss that. Go ahead, Timothy.
I rise with point of clarification, Deacon Timothy Seabrick, Nebraska St. Sam. There isn't, sorry.
Yeah. This microphone over here.
I'm Pastor Beth Regner, and I serve 2 congregations here in the Synod. And speaking to the first comment that was made, that if churches can't afford a pastor, they should just merge together and add more congregations to the pastors or whatever. If you were to double my salary and double my church load, it would really be a terrible situation. I mean, I can only do so much. I feel like we pay pretty good when it comes to seminary, and I am a recent seminary graduate, second career. I won't tell you my age, but schools now are kind of rising to the occasion. United Lutheran Seminary has had a free tuition program for about 3 or 4 years now, and that with some church support enabled me to go through seminary without debt, which was just incredible. And so there are some programs to look into, but I think we have to be realistic. The number of pastors we have now can only do so much.
Thank you. Microphone here in front, please.
Teresa Moreland. I serve Paxton and Sutherland. I am a PMA student. Grew up in Paxton, and I know neither Paxton nor Sutherland can call a rostered pastor themselves, nor can they do it together at the current rate. There's a pastor shortage. I think we just need to consider rural Nebraska and the shortages that we have out there, and we're already combining our services.
Thank you, Pastor. Is there further discussion to this motion? Coming up, okay.
I'm Rhonda Obert from Grace Lutheran Church, rural Wahoo. In relation to increasing salaries, I think that would be fantastic if it was fiscally possible for everyone. Our congregation on any given Sunday could be 10 to 25 members attending. To pay $50,000 in a salary is impossible for us. We are currently in contract with a Presbyterian church who is also rural and in the same situation. I just, while I would love to pay $1 million to a pastor because they do so much and it's all appreciated, it is a lot to ask a pastor to come out of seminary or change of career or any other church and say, hey, you're going to be traveling to 3 churches and you have to take care of everybody in those 3 churches, maybe smaller than a mega church, or a big church, but how do you minister when you're going over miles and miles? It takes a lot of time away from other things that you could be doing, ministering to people. And so those are just some considerations. I know not everybody's from a rural congregation, but that's my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe over here approached first and then here.
Pastor Sarah Cordray, Luther Memorial, Syracuse. Boy, more pay. I would speak in favor of that for sure. However, the reality being in rural settings is that even us in Syracuse, close to Lincoln, I can see I've gotten very expensive when it comes to my entire package with Portico. And I can see how that's a strain, and we've had to be quite unique in our staffing to be able to cover everything and still have me and a deacon and 2 PMAs and some other lay staff with. What I would like to see is, this is why I'm holding my red card, rather than change our guidelines at this point, to explore grant programs and have our Synod intentionally do this, and debt forgiveness. Even debt forgiveness that would be complying to how many years in Nebraska Synod will you serve? I am someone, I graduated from seminary 18 years ago. We only have $1,300 left on our seminary loans for a deacon and a pastor. $50,000, friends. That's what we came out with. And we've been paying $300 with deacon and pastor because we met in seminary. But I would like to see us go that direction. I asked our Synod, I've asked churchwide, I've gone through other synods. I even applied for the federal and got denied. There has been no avenues. Our newer graduates have more for them now than even those of us 15 to 20 years ago graduated. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Microphone here.
I mostly just want to remind that what we're talking about are not requirements, but are guidelines. And so I'm...
Name and congregation,
Oh,
please.
sorry. I'm Day Hefner. I'm at St. John's Lutheran in Schuyler. I always forget that part. They are guidelines and they're not requirements. So for me, this is a document that in some ways reflects the value of the labor that we're discussing. And it complies with biblical principles that laborers deserve to be paid. And this is kind of an LSTC thing to say, but it's my alma mater. So it's a witness in a culture that increasingly devalues the labor of many to say this is what our labor is worth. It is valuable, especially in times of rising costs of everything, plus debt. I'm a relatively recent graduate, but I also have quite a bit of student loan debt as well. Even if a congregation can't do that, it's not saying you have to pay this amount. It's saying this is kind of the fair market value of this labor and a fair wage given the economic pressures we face. So approving this or whatever this body decides to go with doesn't automatically mean that's what congregations have to pay. So just bear that in mind.
Thank you, Pastor. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to call this microphone 3 over here. So microphone 3.
Ron Lofgren, I'm a member at St. John's, Norfolk. I call a question.
Question has been called. Is there a second? We have a second? All those in favor, raise your green cards, please. Those opposed, your red cards. The question has been called. We then move to voting on the resolution itself. All those in favor, please raise your green cards. Point of order.
Pastor Nathan Metzger, American Lutheran Church in Adams. Just a point of clarification of what we're voting on. Are we voting on this resolution, or are we voting, are there numbers to replace these numbers with if we vote against?
To this point, there has been no amendment proposed. We've been discussing the resolution as it's stated in the bulletin of reports.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the vote is all those in favor of SC resolution number 5, please raise your green cards. And opposed, red cards. The motion is approved. We did have one resolution submitted for consideration on the floor. This resolution can be found on page 84 in the 2023 Bulletin of Reports, and I invite Ron Gunderson of the Resolutions, References, and Council Committee to share their recommendation.
Thank you. Resolution 2023:1 reads as follows. Resolved that the Nebraska Synod and Assembly direct the Bishop of the Nebraska Synod to appoint a committee to address the issue of rostered ministers in parish ministry associates whose work is impaired by behavioral health issues. And be it further resolved that this committee research guidelines currently used by other synods and church bodies regarding rostered ministers and parish ministry associates whose work is impaired by behavioral health issues. And be it further resolved that this committee develop guidelines to address these issues. And be it further resolved that there be various guidelines to guide anyone who is concerned regarding the behavioral health of a rostered minister or parish ministry associate. Specific guidelines would be developed for each of the following: Synod staff, colleagues of impaired rostered ministers, elected congregational leaders, congregational members, and family members. And be it further resolved that there be a guideline for interim rostered ministers and parish ministry associates when they follow a ministry that has been damaged by behavioral health issues. And be it further resolved that this committee recommend the guidelines above to the Synod Council for adoption in the Nebraska Synod. And be it further resolved that this committee recommend to the Synod Council an education or orientation process so that these guidelines can be implemented effectively at both the Synod and congregational level. The resolutions referencing Council Committee of the 2023 Nebraska Synod Assembly and the Synod Council recommends adoption of Resolution 2023:1.
Thank you. Because this recommendation comes from the Synod Council, it does not require a motion or a second. Is there any discussion on the resolution 2023:1? Microphone 3.
Pastor Otto Schultz, member of Our Saviors in Lincoln. This resolution basically will enable us to go and fill a gap in caring for rostered ministers, PMAs, and congregations. Like anybody else, guys like me face serious behavioral health issues, sometimes alcohol, sometimes mental health issues. We have them at the same rates as other professionals. Other professionals, this is a difference. They have policies that enable their behaviorally troubled professionals to be restored to health and to their profession. They do so while protecting the safety of the people they serve. And this resolution will enable us to develop similar policies for our synod. So, it authorizes our bishop to go and take the first step in filling this gap by appointing a team to develop those guidelines and recommend them to the Synod Council.
Thank you. Microphone number 1 over here.
Eric Spruth Jansen, pastor of St. James Lutheran Church and also chaplain at Mosaic in Beatrice. I just am asking a question for clarification on one of the resolves. They're not numbered, but where it talks about who to have guidelines for, elected congregational leaders, congregational members, and family members. I don't understand how we would develop guidelines for the family members especially, but congregational members and their mental health in a congregational setting. I don't understand how I could see the leaders, but not necessarily congregational members and also the family members.
Can we call on, and I'm allowed to address the question? Go ahead.
All right, thank you. What we're talking about here is that the individual member of a congregation develops a concern about a pastoral leader. They have no guideline for how to deal with that. There's no direction for them to go. At lunch today, a couple of us were talking about a family member of a pastor who was verbally abusive, emotionally abusive. That family member has no guideline, no direction, no help in figuring out where to go with their concerns about that. We want to develop guidelines to help them when they have those concerns. I hope that clarifies that.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, that's what I meant it to say when I wrote it, yes. So it will be clear to our committee.
I'm going to go to microphone number 3 again.
Pastor Megan Morrow, serving transitional ministry at St. John's United Lutheran in Alliance. Speaking in favor of the resolution in general, due to having served on the Synod staff and been aware of the fact that all of us serving in ministry are very human, and we all struggle with various things, and wanting to, I think, promote the health of the body of Christ. And so I think this resolution is an attempt, in this process, is an attempt to provide those resources and processes that can better help us be a healthier body. Together, both ministers and congregations, and again, protecting all parties involved, while hopefully restoring folks to health. And just out of my own experience of having served and witnessed congregations struggling with that, leaders struggling with that, and Synod staff struggling with how do we respond, it would be sure helpful to have some thoughtful guidelines that have been studied and talked about and discussed and put together. So.
Thank you. Microphone 3 again.
Pastor Kate Wolf, serving transitional ministry at St. Matt's in Johnson and Faith in Talmadge. And I have, I guess, a question, since the language is fairly vague for the folks who wrote this, because I could imagine a circumstance in which we're talking about guidelines that are about how people address when they have concerns, but also how those concerns are addressed. So like that we make resources available to, let's say we're really concerned that our pastor is depressed. And so we follow whatever procedures are required to address that. Are those the only procedures we're talking about, or are we also talking about having guidelines and resources in place for those people to access help then? If we've identified the problem, are we just going to say, okay, we've identified a problem and now we have kind of so we have sort of a punitive process? Or is it, since we're talking about restoration to wholeness, is there then accompanying support that goes with that, I guess?
Could we have someone address the question, please? Okay.
Welcome back, Otto. Just hang out up here.
What we're describing, we expect that what we'll have for Synod staff is a policy, and then we'd have guidelines for anybody else. So guidelines are not enforced procedures. They're guidelines to help people figure out how they can work together with Synod staff and with others, with other resources to help them deal with, let's say they perceive a depression in their pastor. That's the idea. Does that help?
Okay. I was just thinking there are limited mental health resources, and so if we're identifying people as speaking the microphone.
Yeah, there are limited, especially in our rural areas, there are limited resources, and our guidelines would help folks to identify those resources to deal with this.
Thank you. Microphone 3. And if there's further conversation, let's just move it away from the microphone so that the business stays on the floor too. Thank you.
Pastor Miles Rook. I serve at Faith Lutheran Church in Seward, and I guess I'm holding up the red card to stand in opposition simply because when I can hear the spirit of the resolution and the care that is behind it. My worry is that this opens an avenue for triangulation, in that I have a concern about a colleague and their mental health or whatever it is, that instead of then taking the initiative to go directly and talking with them and saying, hey, is there something I can do, and showing care for them one-on-one, there's now a way for me to sidestep that and then involve a third party to be like, hey, I'm really concerned about this person. Can you help me out? And instead of us actually addressing the issue with a person, which, I mean, if we're gonna talk about biblical stances and biblical scripture and everything, that is what we are commanded to do, is to actually address things in person, one-on-one first, to go to the person you have an issue with or whatever it is and talk with them, to show them the care yourself. I think this allows for anyone to then say, well, I'm concerned, but I'm going to bring in a third party because I don't want to start a conflict and I don't want to ruin the relationship that we have. So that is my concern, and that's why I'm standing in opposition.
Thank you, Pastor. Microphone number 1.
Pastor Tim Stacy. I serve Zion in Sutton and Prince of Peace in Geneva. Many companies have policies like what this resolution is going to put forward in order for people, for one, pastors who know that they have a problem, and it creates a safer environment for them to say, I need help. Otherwise, a pastor would be reluctant to come forward knowing that they're probably going to lose everything if they admit that they have a problem. This resolution is proposing a policy, and how that policy gets built is important. But I see that this is a need. Many companies, if you come forward and say, listen, I've got a substance abuse issue, I need help, it's not an automatic, you're losing your job. It's now we're going to get you the help that you need, and we're going to help you get through this. Maybe the damage has already been done in the setting that you're in, but we can help you through this. This is something I feel that is much needed. And it also helps the congregation in that they can help their pastor, whether that pastor admits that they have a problem or not. So I should have brought my green card because I'm for this.
Thank you, Pastor. Can you, and please make sure when you approach the mics that we can see your card so that we know where we need to go to keep the balance. I'm going to go to microphone number 3.
Yes, Pastor Chuck Benson. I'm pastor at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Beatrice, Nebraska. As I read this resolution, I'm standing in neutral to this, but the concern that jumps out at me is that I've also spent a good portion of my life as an attorney and as a defense attorney and as representing people who have been alleged to be mentally ill when they're not. And this resolution as it's written troubles me a little bit because that due process doesn't appear to be built into the resolution. If that is a part of what we're going to, or if this is we're going to develop a policy and policy guidelines, I think we need to make sure that we make sure that the person who is alleged to have a problem has the opportunity to challenge that.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Pastor Dave Malloy, Utan, Nebraska, first-time talker, long-time assembler. Maybe we can just pay pastors more money and all this will go away, right? That's a nice, easy solution. No, I actually don't know if I'm speaking in favor of or against this, because the question I have, this whole assembly is about go and love. And when we have more policies and more procedures and more guidelines, do those help us go and love? Or do they get in the way and keep us from going and loving when we just have to go and love? So I just invite everybody to ask that question before they vote on their yes or no of this. And I don't know how I'm going to vote on it yet either. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Microphone 3.
Pastor Nathan Metzger, American Lutheran Church in Adams. As I'm listening to the discussion going on with the concerns about triangulation and the due process portion, I guess I'm kind of asking the question here. As I read this over, I don't really see anything dictating how these guidelines will look other than that this process will end with guidelines of some sort. It seems to leave some room for those guidelines taking shape, which means a Matthew 18 approach to talk to the person first could still be included. And by the same token, those discussions that we've been talking about having the opportunity to defend yourself could conceivably still be worked in. There's just, I guess if you are seeing where there's some direction other than have some guidelines in the end, if you could point that out to me, what they should look like. I think if the sign was lifted up, I have to be quiet now. I have 1 minute. No, I'm good, thank you.
And in that, was there a question to be discussed by the folks who submitted the resolution? Were you asking for clarification?
Yeah, if you can point out where the specific end result, other than just having some sort of guidelines, if there's a specific guideline pushed for in here, can you point it out to me?
Yeah, and I'm just checking to make sure it's in order for the person to respond to the question. So, microphone 3.
The resolution is to authorize the bishop to appoint the committee to make guidelines. Points are well taken about triangulation and about protecting the person. Indeed, that's part of our motivation, is about protecting that person. Today, there are no guidelines. So you can triangulate your hearts out if you want. Today, there is no guideline. So, you can backstab as much as you like. Well, not really, but that's where the guidelines are today. So all we're asking for is authorization for a bishop to appoint a group to develop the guidelines, and then we can vote on the guidelines. So,
okay. Thank you. Thank you. Microphone 1, please.
Rob Quorum, pastor of prison ministries for the Nebraska Synod. And I was thinking one of the first things I want to do is point out the fact that we are not voting on a set of guidelines. We are voting on whether or not a set of guidelines should be developed. So to presume what those guidelines would say would be a bit premature. Secondly, I would like to say that right now, I think I might quibble a little bit with Otto that I think there are some guidelines, but they're entirely punitive. They're like, if there's a victim of mental health behavior, poor behavior of any sort, here's what happens. There are no guidelines that actually help resolve the problem. And strictly punitive is not helpful. What this is about is giving us an opportunity to develop guidelines that are actually helpful. And the third thing I'm thinking is, this is probably really important for the Synod Because if you have someone who says, and it was in one facility, there I go, I'm in prison mode. one location and had a problem. And you think, okay, let's say this person does get some help. And then we think this person is needed in ministry. They have gifts for ministry, and we put them in a new location. What protects the synod? What tells the world that we did due diligence? If you have a procedure, you can say, this is what our procedures are, this is what we did. And so I think we really need a procedure. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone 2 and then microphone 3.
Kim Belkin. I'm pastor and chaplain with Tabitha Hospice and also a transitional pastor at St. Matthew in Omaha. My concern is with the wording impaired and who makes that decision. I think that should be clear. Behavioral health issues have been weaponized and stigmatized in our society. And so we need to have some clarity in the guidelines as to what that means. I understand that these guidelines are being developed, and so that's why I would like to just speak to that as a question, is kind of who gets to determine that. Maybe that's something that this committee needs to address, but I think that we need to be very careful with how that is used and understood.
Yeah, I'm just going to return as a point of order that the motion is primarily to appoint a committee and that the guidelines themselves are still being crafted. So it's a point well taken, but the order on the question on the floor is not quite there yet. There will be time for discussion with that. That's I just want to make sure that we're all clear what it is we're discussing and possibly voting on. So
May I reply? Okay, thank you very much for that point, Bishop. I just really want to encourage the Synod to be careful either way with deciding whether or not to have guidelines. I don't want those guidelines to limit the pastoral ability of the Synod to respond. As someone who lives with behavioral health issues and have had those impact my ministry, I have been very blessed by this Synod and their pastoral response, and I fear that being weaponized and used against people.
Thank you. Microphone 3.
Denise Schleck, Ideas layperson from Zion Lutheran Church Pickerel. And I guess it would be helpful for us to know this is not new. So what other nationally do we have, or with other synods, that we have also policies or guidelines in place that could be used to help guide this committee if it's put together?
I don't believe we can answer that question at this time. Not that we don't want to, but because that's. I'm going to cede to the submitter. Go ahead.
That is one of the tasks of this committee. I will tell you, in preliminary research with other church bodies, they ain't got it either. So we may be leaders in this.
Thank you.
And we're also researching other professions that have guidelines.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Thank you, Bishop. Pastor Al Duminy, Sinai Lutheran. I bring a white card. I do recognize similar concerns that have been voiced about due process and triangulation. Another one that pops up for me that all pastors are aware of is that if there is a concern that's brought forward, that it cannot be anonymous or it cannot be dealt with. That if there is a concern and it is genuinely caring, the person has to be willing to have a conversation and be known personally by name. So I just throw that out as I do hope that we move forward with some guidelines, but I hope all of these things, I hope that professionals, I know since the time I've been in this synod, Dr. Steinke has been an excellent person, a resource around congregational health. So professionals that can help think through healthy communication within congregations would be utilized as well. My question, the reason why I bring a white card, the third point, resolved that this committee develop guidelines to address these issues. My question is, who would approve these guidelines that are put together by the committee? Would it be the Synod Council, or would it be this body, the Assembly, that would approve those guidelines? Because I would hope that it would be this Assembly.
The resolution reads, resolved that this committee recommend the guidelines above to Synod Council for adoption in the Nebraska Synod.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. That's disappointing to me, because I think something that obviously has as much concern as this, every pastor knows you have to decide what needs to be brought back before the whole body and what can be decided by a church council. This appears to me to be something that maybe needs a larger voice before it's decided. And maybe it still is decided by the council, but needs a larger hearing again before the council makes that decision.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Pastor Don Hunziker, Bethany Lutheran Church, Minden, Nebraska. I guess I'm going to basically echo what Pastor Dumany said. My concern, and I would be happy to attempt to make an amendment that this particular, trying to find the right word, resolution would come back once it is developed to this body. It's just too complicated to just go to Synod Council. I was on Synod Council. I appreciate everybody on there, but it's just too complicated. One of the issues that I see are resources, and sometimes in rural areas, it's hard to find resources, and those resources that we find are not always the best. If it's done far away. So I would suggest an amendment that the guidelines be brought back to this body so that they can be looked at.
If there is an amendment that does need to be in a motion,
I would make a motion that the guidelines for this particular, I'm trying to find a good name for it.
well, and you want to amend the particular text of the resolution that is before you.
I like what he said.
Final resolution to replace Synod Council.
And
go ahead,
folks, real quick, I appreciate that there's discussion going on in the room. It is very difficult to hear sometimes, so please let's keep that as quiet as possible. Go ahead, please.
Okay, resolved that this committee recommend the guidelines above to the Nebraska Synod Assembly for adoption in the Nebraska Synod.
That is a motion for amendment. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second for amendment. Is there discussion of the amendment? Microphone 2.
Ernesto Medina, Salem Lutheran Church, Wakefield, Nebraska. I just, for ease of clarification, I think it should just be resolved that this committee recommend to Synod Assembly an education orientation process. Just replace council with assembly.
Well, we have the motion for one amendment on the floor already, so we need to figure that one out first. So the motion on the floor is an amendment, be it resolved that the committee recommend the guidelines above to Synod Assembly for adoption in the Nebraska Synod. That's the motion that is being debated at the moment. Okay? Okay, so microphone number 2, go ahead.
Rob Garton, pastor, First Lutheran in York. Point of order, do we even have the authority to decide this? Are there already procedures in place for these sorts of things to go through the Synod Council, and then the Synod Council has to make a recommendation to the Assembly? Is it something that can go directly from the committee to the Assembly? What is the actual process that has to be followed before we're making amendments and voting on something that we find out is unconstitutional? Thank you.
Well, the motion on the floor is right now an amendment to the text of this resolution, which would put your question slightly out of order. It'd be back in the first resolution. Forgive me, first time, folks. I'm doing my best up here. And that is a question that the Assembly can decide. If there gets to a point where it is out of order, that's why we have a resolutions committee in the first place, is to look and see if the text is allowable within our governing documents. But to remember also that the first purpose of the resolution is to appoint a committee. That is the overwhelming impetus of the resolution on the floor. Okay, but the discussion at the moment is the amendment of whether we want to say Synod Council or Synod Assembly in that resolved. Do we have that amended text available yet? I have a point of order. Hold on. Go ahead, Deacon Timothy.
Point of order, because we're out of practice a little bit. It's
Yeah.
okay. Pastor Don, since you made the amendment, can you please go fill out an amendment sheet that's available at the Synod office in the back? That way we can get the language on the screen. Would that work? We do
Fine.
that?
Thank you. So I'm going to go to microphone number 1.
Pastor Sarah Cordray, Lutheran Memorial Syracuse. Just a point of order. We default very quickly to just talk of pastors only. And this resolution does specifically speak pastors, deacons, or we're considered on there as well as rostered ministers and PMAs. I'm sitting between one of each. So my life will be real better if we remember how to talk about our leaders.
Microphone number 1.
Myron Meyer, interim at St. Paul's Real DeWitt. Just a question, being an interim, and I've done 11 now, and do model constitutions. This is basically, isn't this C905 section C? I mean, I asked that of the original presenter.
I do not have a copy of C905 section C in front of me. I have S. Would you like to talk about S? The question on the floor is the amendment to the resolution, which we are working on. Is there further discussion of the amendment? Are we still working on text? I'm not sure we can get to it. Do I have the Assembly's permission to read the proposed amendment, just so we're all clear what we're voting on? Is that sense of the House? Okay, thank you. This is the second to last resolved. Resolved that this committee recommend the guidelines above to Synod Assembly for adoption in the Nebraska Synod. That is the proposed amendment that is on the floor at the moment. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, it is time to vote. This vote requires a majority. Again, prepare to vote. If you are in favor of this amendment, please raise your green cards. And opposed, please raise your red cards. The amendment passes, which returns to the original resolution as amended. Is there further discussion? If there is no further discussion, we are now ready to vote. Those in favor, please raise your green cards. And opposed, raise your red cards. The motion passes. And thank you for your patience as the chair learns what he is doing. I now invite Treasurer Dan Friedland and the Budget and Finance Committee Chair Kevin Karras to approach to give us their report.
What an assembly so far. I think this has been a great day and a half, 2 days. And I assure you, I'm not a pastor. I serve as your treasurer of the Synod and have for the last 7 years. So it's a great pleasure that I'm here today to talk about our budget, although we have some difficult things to talk about as we go forward. You'll note that the statement of the treasurer's responsibilities begin on page 21 of the Bulletin of Reports. And we continue through that section with the mission share revenue through fiscal year 2022. And we have a report of net assets for the last 2 years. So if you have any questions about what our balance sheet looks like, that's the representation of what we have. Also like to recognize Emmanuel Vision Foundation for the generous support they've given us over the past several years, and that's spelled out in the bulletin reports as you see it. The other thing we're going to talk about is the operating budget, which starts on page 30. Kevin and I will go through that and present that for approval at a later point. But the reality of it is there's some things that we need to talk about and know about. And we also, if you look at page 37, you can see the report from the Budget and Finance Committee Chair, Kevin Karras, who is sitting behind me at the moment, but I'm going to ask him to come forward and help me begin the discussion of the budget for 2024. I will remind you that our fiscal year starts on February 1 and goes through January 31. So what we're talking about is a budget for the period from February 1st, 2024 through January 31st, 2025. Hard to believe, but that's the reality. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. I am very grateful to have had the opportunity and the privilege to serve on the Synod Budget and Finance Committee and the chance to be with you all today. I've been on the committee for a little over 6 years and more recently became chairman of the committee. So I'd like to start by kind of going through how we use guiding principles in the budgeting process and make sure we have this covered. Do we have control of this now?
Should be the side button here. So we're having some technical difficulty here. Here comes help.
Sorry about that. Just trying to advance the slides. So, okay.
We have time. We have time.
Oh, it was asleep. The laptop was asleep.
There you go.
Okay. But well, hold on 1 second. What I'm seeing on the laptop is not what we're seeing. Just needs to, maybe it takes a minute to sync up.
Do you see your name, Pooch?
I see the one I want.
This PowerPoint. Displayed up there.
That's where we're going to do it. There. Oh, there we go. Okay, just my luck. First time here in front of assembly, and I'm the one that screwed up the slides. So yeah, there's a process we follow. You know, really putting the budget together. It takes a lot of work. There's a ton of collaboration between the Synod staff. Dan really leads the process. The Budget and Finance Committee members, And through a lot of collaboration, a lot of hard work, we get to an end product every year. But we consider 7 guiding principles as we decide, it's really the framework for how we build the budget. The first 2 are really related to revenue and understanding our revenue sources. And the first one is looking at the trend in mission share revenue, which is our largest revenue source of the Synod, and it's the sum of the contributions from all of your congregations. So we look carefully at what we expect that trend to be going forward based on historical trends. The second part of our revenue is really all of the revenue sources, which are other contributions to the general fund. This would include interest and investment income from some of the investments that are not restricted. The next 3 guiding principles relate to allocation of resources. So once we think we have a reasonable estimate of how much revenue there's going to be to work with, we have to determine, in line with the mission of the Synod, and really, I would say, in line with we think, is fiduciary responsibility, how those resources should be allocated. So the first one in our largest allocation goes to ELCA church-wide. So this is in return the portion of our resources that we share with the ELCA to support their need and enable them to fulfill their missions, both in the United States and worldwide. The second area of resource allocation comes into the ministries of the Nebraska Synod. So these are ministries within the state of Nebraska that are funded by the Synod. And then last but not least is support of our staff. And really that is integral because it's not only, the administration of all the operations of the Synod, but really the staff is here to support all of you. And that's their primary role. So those are the 3 areas that we have to think about in terms of balancing our how we are going to manage our expenditures. And then the last thing is to kind of look out at the environment and look at the economic trends. What's happening with interest rates, inflation, those sort of things, and try to anticipate what impact those are going to have on the finances of the Synod. And then finally, we pull all that together with the ultimate goal of having a balanced budget. So, it's all about making sure that we manage the resources that we're going to be using throughout the year within what is available, so we can, really fulfill our fiduciary responsibility for a balanced budget. So those are the 7 guiding things that we look at as a framework for budgeting. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to go into a little more detail around the budget.
So thank you, Kevin. If you refer to the bulletin of reports, page 30, what I have showing up on the screen here now is what you'll see on that page. There's a lot of detail, and I'm not going to get into every line item or discuss the whole detail, but we will be talking about some of the important factors, some of the important points that we will be looking at going forward. On pages basically 31 and 32, you'll see a narrative where we try to explain the differences between the years so you have an idea of what's changing, what's transpiring, and how we've affected that in our projections or our forecast for 2024. Looking at the bottom line for 2024, we're looking at a deficit of about $10,000. This is where we ended up in our discussions as a committee and as a group of people involved in the process of budgeting for the Synod. You can see that compares to what we're looking at now for this year, 2023, of about $25,000, and we did have a positive surplus with everything going on in 2022 of about $78,000, which was originally budgeted as a deficit. But the reality of it is things are tightening up, things are changing, and as we go forward, we're going to be looking at more of how we can reflect that in our budgets as we plan for the future. Total revenue for 2024 is forecast to be about $2,870,000, which is less than 2023 by an amount, a sizable amount, and also less than this past year, 2022. So as we look at that, you can see that it's a trend that's looking as declining over a period of time, and we'll talk more about that. As we talked about, or as Kevin talked about, a substantial portion of our revenue comes from your churches, you people that are out there, carrying on the mission of the church. But about 91% of what we have in the way of revenue is from Mission Share. And I want to thank all the congregations for all they do. I know there's some constraints that we see throughout the state that are significant, and we're still seeing a continued support of the churches, and we're very blessed and thankful for that. So the other portion, the 9%, is kind of spread out, and you can look at that in the detail, but that's about 9% of our revenue. We're always looking at how we can manage that to more effectively generate additional income. Mission Share, we're looking at for next year, 2024, of about $2,620,000, which is down from 23 and down considerably from 22. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. But you're looking at the trend, if you go back several years, you can see the trend line that we've experienced, and I've talked about this in the past, and we'll probably continue to talk about it in the future, that because of various factors and then development in the economy and seeing things happening throughout the state, it's been declining, and we anticipate that for 2024. So just wanted to point that out, that it's not something new. It didn't happen just in one year, but it's a situation that we all have to be sensitive to and aware of. Total expenses, and I'm going to talk in terms of 3 1s. So if I miss a one, you'll let me know. But as we walk forward, the expenses we're planning for next year are decreasing. We have to do that as we try to balance the budget because we have declining income. But the reality of it is that we're going to be looking at about $2,879,000 for next year compared to the other years, which were higher than what we see here. This is a depiction of what the expenses are. You can see the biggest portion of our expenses are with Churchwide. It's something that's part of our mission, our ministry, that we forward money on to Churchwide for their mission and ministry. And I think, as Reverend Otten was talking yesterday, it's a sizable sum. And we're going to try to continue that. We've had to make some changes there for next year. But if you look at it, the other areas of expenses are in the areas of salaries and compensation, and also the mission ministries that we have throughout the state. So you can get a detailed picture of that in the statement. But this kind of puts it in a graphic depiction of what the expenses look like for the next year. I will point out the fact that in your registration packet, there was a document that looks like this. It's something that's I think very well done by the staff to not only talk about numbers, but talk about the reality of what we're doing as a synod and where the money goes. And Kevin talked about the allocation of resources. This tells you in more of a narrative form of what those expenditures are and what we're supporting as we go forward. But I would take a time, if you would, take a look at that and make sure you read through that, because I think the staff has done a very good job of depicting what we do with our money as we support other ministries. Churchwide ministries, we talk about that. That's my first number one. We've been in an area that we've committed ourselves to supporting Churchwide, which is very important for the ministries they provide to not only us, but on a worldwide basis. So I think, as we talked about yesterday, it's a very significant amount that we do provide to Churchwide, but that's declining over time because of Mission Share. We forecast this based upon a percentage of our Mission Share revenue, and as you can see with that, it's going to be going down. We did make a hard decision this year. We've always been, since I've been treasurer, have been forwarding 54.1% of our Mission Share to Churchwide. In order to accomplish the first one, we decided this year we're going to be for 2024, we'll be at 53.1%, which is a decrease. But we wanted to make sure everybody's aware of that's something that we've tried not to do in the past, but in order to look at our situation and the economy as a whole, we're making that decision to go down by 1%. So you can see the history of where mission share or where support of churchwide has been, and it's also showing that decline over the period of time. The Nebraska Synod Ministries, we're forecasting or projecting for next year $562,000 to be used by the various ministries that are broken out in the budget bulletin of reports. So you can see, the organizations and the ministries we support through that funding. But again, it's been a product of Mission Share. And this is my second number one, the fact that we took the historical relationship of the expenditures to Mission Share and reduced it by 1%. So that's another area that we felt we had to do in order to facilitate a balanced budget, or close to a balanced budget for 2024. But the breakdown, you can see it ranges everywhere from about $5,000 up to $137,000. So it's broken down among various organizations, which are listed in the bulletin. But you can see it graphically that we do support a lot of ministries throughout the state and other parts of the country. Salaries and operations. I can't emphasize enough the fact that we're caught in an environment right now, an inflationary trend that's been very hard on people, I'll put it that way. And we want to make sure we compensate our staff well and not overpay, not underpay, but make sure that we are fair in what we compensate our staff. We've been looking at salary inflation, throughout the country, but we're also looking at ways that we can look at improving the salary levels of our staff as we go forward, whether it's on a percentage basis or a market basis. But the reality of it is that we're trying to stay up with inflation. We're not able to do it because obviously inflation is too high compared to what we're able to do. So it's a reality of life. The other part of the operations are the expenses we pay to operate. We're anticipating with everything happening that we're going to see an increase there also. But the other part of the one is the fact, and we talked about it yesterday from a staffing perspective, that we are going to be down one FTE, one full-time equivalent throughout 2024 compared to where we were at the beginning of 2022. That's with all the effort that I know the bishop and the staff are doing right now to make sure, as I call it, we're right-sized. We're doing the right thing. We're able to respond to your needs, but yet we're able to afford that in our budget. And I don't want you to think that we cut that one position from a budgetary perspective. It was done based upon, as the bishop said yesterday, what we think we need to do our jobs. So the reality of it is that for 2024, we're looking at an increase in expenses going from about $837,000 to $890,000 for next year. So that basically is a summary of the revenue and expense items. Remember the three ones that we were talking about? Those are some major decisions that we've had to make as we move forward. I will say that when we started out the process of looking at the budget, we were in a much larger deficit than what we are showing here. While this is a deficit, it's practically speaking a balanced budget. So with that, I thank you for being here this afternoon and being a part of the assembly. But I don't know if we're able to answer any questions at the moment, but
Okay, it's been moved that the proposed 2024 budget be adopted. The motion does not require a second. Is there any discussion? Microphone one.
Pastor Eric Spruth Johnson from St. James Lutheran Church, Humboldt, and Mosaic and Beatrice. I have a concern about some of the languaging just on our giving towards, especially the larger ELCA, that is our ministry also, not them. So that's just part of our ministry. That is one of our outreaches as well. So I've been hearing some their ministries, and then our ministries here in Nebraska. We are the ELCA. So I just had some concerns about that languaging. Thank you.
So, I appreciate the fact that, we are part of ELCA, we all are. And the fact that when we make cuts to our budget for the purpose of balancing our budget, it makes it very difficult for everybody. And I know that church-wide, realistically, has seen a decline in their mission support. And that's something that makes it difficult for everybody to carry on the mission and ministry that they do for the greater good.
Maybe do you want to go to that stand, maybe just in case there are other questions?
Sure.
Can we make the other one live too? Thank you. Just in case there's other questions. And microphone 1, again, please.
Bob Hayden, pastor, Bethlehem Lutheran Wahoo. I sat in the shoes of Kevin the previous, 6 years, something of that nature. And I just want people to know, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but when I first got on the budget committee, our budget was $4 million. We raised $4 million, and that was our expenditures. We're at 2.6, and that doesn't count inflation. So I don't know where the actual numbers are, but I just want you to know that this committee has worked so hard and the staff has worked so hard to keep finding every nickel we can find and still do the job. And as you said, we're losing a staff member out of necessity. It's not a healthy thing, obviously, folks, and I think we just need to do a whole lot better job in our churches in stewardship and make this known and let people know how valuable the work that's done here at Synod and level and the church-wide. And I got to tell you, Dan is one of the greatest. He can do it. I mean, he's just really good at that, and I've always appreciated working with him, and I appreciate working with Kevin too, and when we were on the committee at the same time.
Thank you. Microphone 1, again.
Christine Coram. I'm a lay member of the team here for Synod from American Lutheran in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I have a question. At the end of January 2025, if there is indeed a deficit, how does that get handled?
So the question is, how does that get covered? Essentially, over the past few years, we've been able to put money away in what we call the contingency fund. It's kind of our rainy day fund as we look at some planned deficits that we've had in the past. So we have a balance there. If you look on this statement of net assets, you can see that. But our plan would be that if we do have a deficit, as is forecast here, that we would cover that through that fund.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? If there is no further discussion, I invite Pastor Emily Johnson to come forward to lead us in prayer. Can we bring up microphone number 2, please? Got it? Thank you.
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for all that you have entrusted to us, for the many gifts that you put at our disposal. Help us be good stewards of them. Thank you for the time, the talent, and the treasure. Be with us as we make this decision and guide our thoughts and our votes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We are now ready to vote. All those in favor, please raise your green voting cards. All those opposed, please raise your red voting cards. This resolution has passed. Thank you. I want to now, and thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation as well. I want to introduce Ron Lofgren, the chair of the Minutes Committee.
The Minutes Committee has approved yesterday's minutes. In accordance with the Synod's constitution, today's minutes are the responsibility of the bishop and the secretary of the Synod.
Thank you, Ron. That brings our business to an end. And I want to thank you all for attending the 2023 Nebraska Synod Assembly. Would you all join me again in thanking the Planning Committee for this year's assembly and the many volunteers behind the scenes. I also want to take time again to mention and thank your Nebraska Synod staff. You don't see the hours of work that go into this, most of you, but they work long beyond what should be asked or expected of them, and it's a privilege to serve this synod with them. So please join me in expressing our gratitude for all that they do to pull this off. As you are exiting, following our closing prayer, please drop off your voting cards and lanyards in the baskets near the exit doors or at what we're calling the Synod office, here, the desk at the main entrance. If you remember, you signed your name to a picture of feet on your way in. On your way out, grab an image of someone else's feet. Unless you want to pray for yourself, I suppose you could. But on the way out the door, please grab an image of someone's feet and make a commitment to pray for that individual throughout the coming year. Please mark your calendars for the 2024 Synod Assembly. That will be June 1st and 2nd, 2024, June 1st and 2nd, 2024. We will culminate our year of Go And by being church together as we gather live and in person across the Nebraska Synod to worship together on Sunday, June 2nd, 2024. And we'll have more details about that to come. All 90,000 disciples in the Nebraska Synod, including you, are invited to respond to Christ's sending in the Great Commission and to go and. Every month, you will find resources in the Nebraska Synod e-news and on the website. You can share your ideas and your experiences about this by emailing goand@nebraskasynod.org. goand@nebraskasynod.org. So, I'm going to invite you in just a second to stand up. Not yet, but in just a second, I'm going to stand up. We are going to count down and we are going to proclaim the many ways we will go and this year. So please stand up. Ready, set, go. We will go and, 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 go and. Thank you. As we go and we remember that we do not go alone, for God promises to go with us and we walk with each other. Please remain standing and join me in our closing of assembly worship.
Sheltered comfort, as these walls your people set. Sweep us into costly service, there with Christ to bear the cross. There with Christ to bear the cross. God of blazing, God of burning, all our thoughts your purpose merge. Through your church, Christ's living body, let your flaming spirit surge. Let it see conceals injustice, kindle us to speak your truth. Kindle Christ our Lord. Make us one in Christ our Lord. God of passion, God unsleeping, stir in us love's restlessness. Where the people cry in anguish, may we share your heart's distress. Raise us from content with evil, save us for your kingdom's good. Save us for your kingdom's good.
In Matthew's gospel, Jesus tells us to go and
make disciples.
Go. In the gospel of Mark, Jesus calls us to go and
tell the good news to everyone, everywhere.
In the gospel of Luke, Jesus promises to send the Holy Spirit to be with us.
And in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you.
What is a mission?
It is sending forth people somewhere to serve.
God sends us on a mission. Do you recognize your mission of being sent by God to your homes, congregations, communities, and the world?
What is a commission?
It is granting authority, allowing us to act on behalf of another.
God commissions us to go.
Do you accept the commission from God to go and act on God's behalf?
We do. Throughout this year, you are invited to go and
act on God's behalf in many and various ways, and go and pray.
We will go and pray. Go and listen.
We will go and listen.
Go and share your story.
We will go and share our story.
Go and serve with neighbors.
We will go and serve with neighbors.
Go and ask.
We will go and ask.
Go and be honest.
We will go and be honest.
Go and be present.
We will go and be present.
Go and rest.
We will go and rest.
Go and have the conversation.
We will go and have the conversation.
Go and be intentional.
We will go and be intentional.
Go and tell the story.
We will go and tell the story.
Go and be the church.
We
will go and be the church. We are church together. Together we will learn more about our mission. Together we will learn more about all that we have said and will do. Together we will live our mission. Together we will go and be of good courage.
Go and know.
We know that God's hand is leading us and God's love is supporting us.
Knowing that,
we go and
go to the world, go into all the earth, go preach the cross with Christ renews thy spirit, baptizing us, the sign of our rebirth. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Go to the world, go into every place, go live the word of God's redeeming grace. Go seek God's presence in each time and space. servant church to follow Christ's own way. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Go to the world, go as the ones I said, for I am with you till the age shall end. When all the walls of glory cry amen. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
The Holy Three, the Holy One, increase your hope, strengthen your faith, deepen your love, empower and equip you to go and grant you peace. Amen. I now declare this 2023 Nebraska Synod Assembly closed in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go and in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks